There seems to me to be some complexity and debate in the Jewish world between the extent to which Judaism believes God is involved in our day-to-day lives. What exactly is the Jewish perspective on this?
I'm not sure what confusion you're referring to, but we have a notion called hashgacha. Hashgacha means that God is directly involved. However, the conflicting point there is your free will. So human free will means that when people say it's all God, that God runs the world, everything that happens is God. That's not accurate. We say that God is all of existence, and yet you have the freedom to choose, free will. So when a person, for example, suffers some consequence of their own free will, it's inaccurate to blame God. The blame should be taken by the individual. Things that are beyond your free will, we said God imposes. A person gets ill, for example, not through any misbehavior or unhealthy behavior. That certainly we say comes from God. There's a reason for that. But if a person damages their own health through a bad diet or lack of exercise or whatever they're doing, that's inappropriate to say that God caused that. Of course, there's an interaction with God's operation in the world and your free will. But there needs to be a clear distinction between what he does, which is emanating into the world from outside, and what you invoke in the world through your own free will. And again, it's a delicate balance between those to see it accurately. So when we say that God operates in the world, you need to know exactly what the limits are. There's a deep Kabbalistic idea which refers to God's withdrawal from the world. Deep Kabbalistic argument, is it illusion, is it true? But in the practical aspect of our lives is certainly room for our own operation. And finally, he certainly operates in the world in such a way that you don't see. Right? So in a prophetic era, you see God operating in the world. You see miracles, you see prophecy. We live in a post-prophetic era. So God's operation in the world, however intense it may be, is certainly hidden from us. And that raises the problem of faith, the question of faith, how much we choose to see, how much we don't. But there's no question that we have an amplified free will in the world because his operation in the world is not easily visible.
But the complexity that I was referring to in this whole discussion is that I understood it to be that there's a more sort of Hasidic position, perhaps of I think originally expressed by the Baal Shem Tov, that a rabbi from maybe the 16 or 1700s? 1700s, who suggested that everything is God, even the sort of the leaves falling from the tree, everything is the direct will of God. And then the other side, I think, like the Rambam, who says that, Maimonides, who says that only people who deserve it have direct divine providence, and there's sort of like a scale depending on how connected you are. So how do we deal with these two opposing views?
I'm not sure you've set up the two opposing each other.
Correct me, yeah.
But there is such a debate. At the highest level, this debate took place between the Hasidim, the early Hasidim, and those who opposed them at the time. This is very difficult to go into detail in this forum, but very briefly, the original, deepest origin of Kabbalistic thought is that God withdraws himself from a sphere of activity in which the world operates, that he takes himself away, so to speak. Obviously, that's a problematic concept. What do you mean God takes himself away and is not? But certainly he manifests in a way where there's a space for the world to exist and for free will to exist. The debate between those early authorities was, is this genuine or an idea and an illusion? Does God really take himself out of reality, or does it just appear that way to us? And the problem is, either way you go, or you have a philosophical problem. If you say that God is really all that there is, then we're just some sort of illusion. That's problematic. If you say that we are genuine and we really exist, the problem is, how can God remove himself? Those are the two poles.
My brain's hurting.
Yes. I'll tell you the practical output. Of course, the debate took place at two levels. One was philosophical and Kabbalistic, and the other was practical. If, for example, you say that all reality is God, then your action in the world becomes much less important. If you're a religious Jew, for example, you can pray at all sorts of weird times because there's no real time. Time's an illusion. Your mitzvot, your commandments in the world are really not that important because it's all godliness. And there was a real fear that people taking that view may end up riding roughshod over Jewish law. The other fear on the other side was, if you say that the world is real, our actions are real, have real consequences, the problem is, where is God in your life? That was the other side of the debate. The resolution was, both sides pulled each other into a balance point where the Hasidic contribution to Jewish life became incredibly important and enlivened all that we are today. And yet it did not go so far that the halachic and the legal side of Judaism disappeared. So that's the tension between the two. You are quite correct. There are the two positions. And the correct view, of course, is a perfect harmony between the two.
And so to summarize, or to perhaps to answer, to what extent is God involved in our lives, in my life, in your life, and the lives of the viewers?
Well, the answer to this is that God is involved totally, but the question is only one of visibility. In other words, behind the scenes, He's operating totally, giving you room for free will. How much do you see Him interacting directly in your life? That is a question of your spiritual level. And you alluded to this before. A person of sufficiently raised and elevated spiritual level will see direct interaction in his life. That's called hashgacha pratit. God interacts directly in your life in a visible way. The person who believes that is merely a statistic and functions as some part of the scenery gets dealt with as some part of the scenery. And his life manifests as simply a statistical, meaningless process. So really the answer is people on a very elevated spiritual level invoke a relationship with God and they see the results. But you only get dealt with the way you deal. And therefore a person who believes that he's a mere statistic, his life will prove that to him. So we call the shots really. Amazingly, we determine how close that relationship is, and God interacts and responds to our choices.
To stay up to date with the latest JCV content, if you're on YouTube, click subscribe below the video and the alarm bell. And if you're on Facebook, click the like button, and under following, click see first.